10. Antarctic Tanks. You may have heard rumors that Hitler tried to build a secret Nazi base in Antarctica. And while the gossip of this base has been swirling around for decades, there's never been any concrete proof to back them up. But there is evidence that between 1939 and 1941, the Americans sent their own armed expedition into the icy continent. We know it happened because the tanks the Americans sent are still there, rusting away and slowly getting destroyed by Antarctica's harsh environment. The expedition team was called the United States Antarctic Service, or the Third Birds Expedition. The unit was led by the famous polar explorer Richard Byrd and was made up of 59 men with a whole heap of equipment. This crew and their machines were transported across the ocean by ship and dropped on the shore of Antarctica, where they would stay for 2 years to chart the coastline. In order to help them get around, the explorers used 3 M2A2 light tanks. It wasn't until 1941 that the expedition team was forced to call it quits because of the trouble brewing in Europe. When war broke out with Nazi Germany, the team abandoned both their Antarctic bases, left behind all of their equipment and their tanks without ever having used them in combat. The only thing the tanks were used for was driving over snow and traversing through the rough, rocky terrain of Antarctica. They're now mostly covered in ice and slowly decaying. 9. World War II landing craft. Lake Mead is the largest man-made water reservoir in the entire United States. But as America experiences one of the greatest droughts in reported history, the lake is drying up fast. And while that's bad news for people who like flushing their toilet and convenient plumbing, it's good news for people who like finding crazy stuff. Because everything from skeletons to war machines have been revealed by the rapidly declining water level. Once hidden by the lake's waves, one of the most interesting vehicles recently found was a Higgins landing craft that was used in World War II. It's been absolutely decimated by nature and almost completely rusted through after spending decades trapped underwater. As of July 2022, the Higgins landing craft has sprouted halfway out of the water. That's pretty scary considering it was originally 185 feet beneath the surface. This gives you a good idea of just how much water the lake has lost. But what in the world was a boat used to storm the beaches of Normandy doing all the way in Lake Mead? The Associated Press says the craft was probably brought back to America and used for surveying purposes along the Colorado River before it sank for unknown reasons. 8. The Island of Death. The Battle of Guadalcanal took place between August 7, 1942 and February 9, 1943. It was the first major battle on land by the Allied forces in their ongoing war against Japan. It was mostly United States Marines involved in the fighting. The soldiers had landed on the islands of Guadalcanal, Florida, and Tulagi. When they first arrived, the Japanese were taken by surprise and swiftly kicked off the islands. Then, for half a year, the Japanese men struggled desperately to regain control of the land, but every desperate attempt ended in failure. The Marines fought 3 major land battles, daily aerial battles, and the infamous naval battle of Guadalcanal, and in December, Japan finally gave up all hope of retaking the islands. There isn't much left on the land today that shows what took place almost a century ago. But there are a few war machines that were abandoned after the fighting on Guadalcanal and still remain. There's a group of LVT amphibious vehicles that were used during the initial battle to take the island. They're still there, right on the edge of what was once a battlefield, where soldiers lost their lives sitting peacefully under some trees. The vehicles have grass growing out of their roofs and are slowly being returned to nature. 7. The Ghost Fleet of Mallows Bay. The Ghost Fleet of Mallows Bay in Maryland is a perfect example of just how quickly man-made war machines can get taken over by nature. The murky waters of Mallows Bay serve as a ghostly ship graveyard. The remains of vessels that fought in World War I are decaying rapidly in the water's depths. These were powerful steamships built specifically for war, vessels designed for killing, destruction, and death. There are about 230 shipwrecks total in the bay, making it the largest ghost fleet in the Western Hemisphere. Dozens of the boats are poking out of the shallow water, with their waterlogged hulls crumbling away piece by piece. But things aren't as bad as they seem. These broken vessels are now homes for woodland critters and vibrant marine life. Nature is not only beating down these ships until they disintegrate, but it's also made them part of a larger ecosystem, giving them a new purpose. The steamships were built at the beginning of World War I to create a massive fleet of wooden vessels. The main issue was that at the start of the war, the military really didn't have many transport ships. They ordered 1,000 steamships to be built within a short time span of 18 months. But forcing these shipmakers to rush caused the boats to be constructed poorly. They also weren't ready in time to be used. By the time the Germans surrendered, not one of the ships ordered had even crossed the ocean. With the war finished, the ships were brand new and already obsolete, so they were cast aside to Mallows Bay. When environmental activists became concerned in the 1960s about damage to the environment, they looked into possibly removing the ships. But their investigation showed that the vessels had already become part of a thriving ecosystem. To remove them back then or now would do more harm than good. How do you feel about artificial reefs? Tell us in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. 6. The Flamenco Beach Tanks. Culebra Island in Puerto Rico is one of the most beautiful spots in the world, with a gorgeous Caribbean landscape unlike anywhere else. It has turquoise waters, white sand beaches, a beautiful interior made of lush greenery and rolling hills, and the occasional abandoned war machine from World War II. Its beautiful shores may be an active wildlife sanctuary and major tourist attraction, but it was also once a dumping ground for military equipment used mostly by the United States. The story of the tanks on Flamenco Beach takes us all the way back to 1901. That's when Spain handed Puerto Rico over to President Theodore Roosevelt. The president immediately allocated the public land on Culebra Island to be used by the Navy, allowing them to utilize the lush island for military testing. And in 1936, the island became a bombing practice site. There was never an official base made on Culebra, but plenty of equipment and armaments were brought and left on its white beaches. The bombing also lasted for decades, with one missile crashing down almost every day in 1969 during preparations for the Vietnam War. In 1970, the local residents started protesting. They wanted the Navy out of there, and they were deadly serious. The protesting eventually worked, and by 1975, the Navy was gone. But they did leave behind a lot of trash. Like a group of spring breakers at the beach, the Navy left garbage thrown across the sand everywhere for the locals to clean up. And while they got most of the abandoned gear and debris, the massive tanks were a whole different story. They could never move them since the machines were so heavy, so they had to leave the tanks sitting on the beach where they remain to this day, being slowly destroyed by the salty sea winds. With enough time, nature will erode the tanks down to nothing but sharp, rusty metal nubs. 5. Cardiff War Bunker. There's a Cold War bunker hidden inside some overgrown bushes in a Cardiff suburb. The building was built back in 1956, and most people don't even know it's there. Nature has taken the whole bunker over on both the inside and exterior. It almost looks like a maintenance shack tucked away in the hedges, something nobody would ever think twice about investigating. But in reality, it was once a bunker that acted as a civil defense control center. The point of the bunker was to be used in case of an emergency. There was a small force of Civil Defense Corps stationed there until 1968. At a time when the world was constantly worried about nuclear war breaking out, the bunker was seen as a necessity and scapegoat. But war never came and the bunker was eventually abandoned. Everything inside today is exactly the same as it was when the doors first closed and the lock was turned over 50 years ago. The only difference is that nature has been steadily melting into the site, rusting and rotting all the man-made objects and shrouding the entrance in bushes. But even though the bunker is in terrible shape and probably completely useless, it recently went to auction with a price tag of over $40,000. Would you ever consider buying something like that? 4. Japanese Midget Submarine. There is an island named Kiska in the far western Aleutian chain that still holds lost remnants of World War II. The island is cold, isolated and technically a part of Russia. It's very far to the northeast of Japan and just west of Alaska, right in the middle of the Bering Sea. Lying on the shores of Kiska Island lies the rotting corpse of a Type A Midget submarine that was once used by the Japanese in the 1940s conflict. Midget submarines were a nightmare for pilots. Two men squeezed into a tiny tub that barely had enough room for one person. It would have been extremely claustrophobic and probably one of the worst jobs imaginable. The two men in the submarine then had to look for ships and fire miniature torpedoes at point-blank ranges. The whole purpose behind the Midget subs was to evade detection, get close to a ship, and shoot directly at its hull for optimum damage. The rusted submarine on Kiska was discovered by an archaeologist named Deborah Corbett and her team when they were searching for prehistoric sites on the island. They never expected to come across a 78-foot-long sub covered by grass and sunk into the dirt. It must have been abandoned in 1942 when the Japanese left. Now the Midget sub is just a few years away from getting fully consumed by the Earth. 3. The unfinished fortress. The Stachelberg artillery fortress stands on a hill overlooking the town of Barbie, near the Kirkenos Mountains in the Czech Republic. It's one of the largest fortresses located in the country, but it's not fully finished. Construction on the defensive fortress started in 1937. But in 1938, when the United Kingdom, France and Italy agreed to hand Czechoslovakia over to Germany in order to avoid war, which started anyway despite this gesture, the construction of the fortress was paused. And for that reason, the fortress was never actually finished. It was a ruin before it was completed, and the place was abandoned once the war fully began. If the defensive fortress had been finished, it would have been a very impressive war station. It was supposed to have 34 halls made for storage, offices, and technical equipment. It was also being hollowed out under the ground and would have been a subterranean labyrinth consisting of stone passages occupied by soldiers ready to defend their homeland. The fortress was almost completely reclaimed by nature before it was turned into a functioning museum back in 1993. The new owners took the incomplete fortress and turned it into a place for sightseeing. Surprisingly, Stachelberg is in much better shape today than it was in 1938 when construction stopped. 2. Dooga Radar. The Russian woodpecker, or the Dooga Radar, is an abandoned antenna hidden deep inside the snowy forest outside Chernobyl. It's just north of Ukraine's capital of Kyiv, tucked away in a peaceful fairy tale woodland. Despite its whimsy, there are no people here since it's technically in the Chernobyl exclusion zone and still considered radioactive. But other than the radioactivity, the creepy Soviet base and the huge antenna system, it's really all very peaceful. The Dooga Radar stands an overwhelming 492 feet tall, stretching over 2,100 feet in length. It was one of the most important military facilities used in the Soviet Union's communist empire. It was a huge advancement in technology during its time, as an enormous structure of antennas, turbines, and metal piping. The purpose of the radar was to detect missiles getting directed at the Soviet Union. Built in 1972, the radar should have been able to detect missile launches from halfway around the world by picking up signals bouncing off the ionosphere. But in reality, Soviet scientists didn't fully understand the ionosphere, and the radar dish never lived up to its desired potential. Then, when the tragic Chernobyl disaster happened and the USSR began to crumble, the radar was abandoned altogether. These days, it's on the verge of total destruction. The massive antenna system is being constantly beaten down by nature and will likely break or fall any day now. 1. The Battle of Saipan. Saipan Lagoon in the northern Mariana Islands is home to multiple diving sites where curious divers can get a look at incredible abandoned military machines, Japanese shipwrecks and aircraft, as well as US landing vehicles and airplanes. In the clear waters off the coast of Managaha Island and in Tanapag Harbor, these once mighty war devices are being converted by nature into thriving underwater habitats for marine life. Further south in the Charlan-Canoa Lagoon, 3 US tanks are now home to colorful fish and countless marine critters. The war machines have been reclaimed by natural elements and turned into artificial reefs. The reason there are so many wrecks in this particular location is that the Mariana Islands, and specifically the island of Saipan, set the stage for one of the fiercest battlefronts in World War II. The Pacific D-Day is what many historians refer to it as. The invasion fleet left Pearl Harbor on June 5, 1944. And from June 15th until July 9th that year, Operation Forager fought the Japanese and pushed them back closer and closer to their homeland. As the Americans pushed them back, countless vehicles were left to the sea's mercy. Which of these slowly degrading war machines is your favorite? Let us know what you think in the comments and remember to subscribe. Thanks for watching and come back soon for more awesome videos.